There was one particular Olmec sculpture, altar type thing, that had these snake symbolism all around it, and also it had this sort of priestly sort of, I don't know what it was, emerging from this big square stone, about the size of this table. It was huge.
Yeah.
And me and my friend Ivan walked up to it, and when we were about 10 feet away, suddenly we felt this powerful energy field all around it, and it was palpable. You could touch it.
Yeah.
You could actually feel like where it was with your hand. Like, we weren't dowsing, it was by pure chance. It's almost like something in us is like demanding we're going in there, we're going to do this, whatever the authorities say. And they've realised that there's nothing can stop the people now, they have to let us in. And so I like that side of it, that these have such a power, these sites, that they magnetise you so strongly that even like the authorities cannot do anything about it. And I think this is happening all over the world. You get the popularity of these sites. It's awesome. One of the things, one of the legends about the whole area is the legend of Quetzalcoatl. And he was supposed to, he was like a tall, white-looking guy, pale features, beard, long robes, blue eyes, very almost like albino, you know, and he was like glowing with energy. He came with a band of followers on what was called a raft of serpents, and he turned up on the Gulf Coast area, which is where all the Olmecs were, and actually created and taught lots of people and travelled through that whole area, teaching these people all these different arts.
Hi, I'm Carrie from Project Camelot, and I am here with Hugh Newman, and we've just completed the Megalithomania conference here in South Africa, and I am very happy to be able to take some time out and talk to Hugh Newman. We did a short interview at the pyramids in Egypt, which was a lot of fun, and I think it had a lot of viewers out there, but we didn't get a chance to really get in deep into the subjects that Hugh covers. And so this is our opportunity, and so Hugh, welcome.
Thank you.
And what I'd like to do is have you talk about your background in sort of just a quick summary, and then I assume that people can go catch up on our first interview. Anything that we covered there, let's try not to go over some old ground. But we do want to talk about the grid lines, and I'd love to talk about your trip down to Central America and the Olmecs and all of that. So take it away.
Okay, well, what got me into this sort of earth mysteries or megalithic subject is really the crop circles. A lot of people find the same thing when they because it's just such an amazing phenomenon. Whoever makes them, you know, people say they're man-made, people say they're aliens, but most of them have no explanation and they haven't been discovered. So I was drawn into that about 15 years ago, and from that, suddenly within a few years I realised I was visiting all these ancient sites just incidentally because they're always based near them, and it really drew me into this whole ancient mysteries realm about who built these sites and how do they move these megaliths, and all the earth energies particularly and ley lines kind of really caught my attention, and I suddenly developed this sort of passion for it, and it basically became a megalithomaniac and just got completely involved in that world and started researching it and covering it, eventually putting on the Megalithomania conference. So it's just a case of really the crop circles. They have so many dimensions to them as well. You think about the geometry, the placement in the landscape, the sophisticated mathematics, and many other aspects. And so that's kind of what drew me in. But there's a lot of other things that sort of brought me to this point in my life where I was kind of attracted to these kind of, especially landscape type of mysteries.
Okay. So you're one of those people that I assume thinks that most crop circles are not man-made.
Yeah, you could say that. I mean, I've seen some incredible footage of balls of light and orbs and different reports that have come through over the years about many of the crop circles. Now, probably lots of them are man-made now because it's like the phenomenon has gone into the public domain. And since the Doug and Dave incident, that's kind of what it's been developed since then. But you look in the history books with crop circles, for instance, and just in my local area in East Anglia where I'm currently staying, there's a place called Eversden, and from 1936 I think it was, there was a crop circle report. This woman, a farmer's wife, went out into their backyard and all these fields, and she reported these strange energy and light phenomena in her garden. She went out to investigate. There was this crackling sound when she went, just freshly, and there was a freshly made crop circle there. And so that's back in the 1930s. So how do you have to kind of throw that kind of thing in there when people start claiming that all crop circles are man-made. You can go much further back in time with the crop circles. For instance, there's the famous mowing devil. It goes back to the 1600s, and again in East Anglia, in the east side of England. And where these light phenomena was happening, and then there was something that appeared in the field there, and they claimed it was the devil, but actually it was probably just a crop formation classically being created, which has been reported kind of all over the world now.
Okay, so have you made it a sort of a study of yours to get into what the crop circles might mean?
Yeah, I mean, as soon as you get involved in studying crop circles and you sort of go into it and you look at the geometry, the maths and the sophistication of it, and also interestingly when they appear, like the dates of them and other things like this, you start finding all these parallels and almost like confirmations of things that you've been looking into. And so I find it it's such an incredible subject, which is so easily overlooked by people who laugh at them. But I really think there's too many dimensions and there's too many formations now to actually ignore them. And the thing that inspires me really is the relationship of these crop circles to the ancient sites, and because they're always in the vicinity of them. And most stone circles you get in the sort of Wiltshire area, especially the largest stone circles in the world, like Avebury, etc. Are actually right where the hub, where all the crop circles appear around. And you get this at other sacred sites all across Britain and the world, so there's some connection there. So immediately I started looking into the earth energies and noticed that all these energy lines, the energy currents, sort of form between these ancient sites and sort of travel over the landscape. Crop circles seem to be placed between them, as though something's being put through these earth energies, some kind of intelligence or phenomena, and it's actually possibly creating the crop circles. It's just speculation research at the moment. It's not. There's been no scientific studies done on this. But the more you look into it, and the more you dowse and you find these particular formations between these sites, you realise there's something going on there.
So, are you a dowser?
Yeah, I do dowsing. Yeah, I've been studying geomancy with Sean Kerwin, who's a sort of master geomancer back in England.
Okay, when you say geomancer, is that the official word for dowsing?
Yes, the Western tradition, I think, geomancy, whereas in the East it's feng shui. But I mean, what me and Sean sort of specialise in, well, he does the whole thing. He's been trained up for like 10 years. But he's taught me all his techniques of dowsing, especially for earth energies and ancient sites, and how to do that properly there. Again, people question dowsing and the geomancy, but when you look how far that goes back. It's quite incredible. It goes back, if not hundreds, certainly thousands of years. And it's even used by modern industry to find underground water pipes and electric wires and other things. And so people know it works, and yet a lot of people find it hard to accept that these invisible energy currents are actually there. But fortunately, what the geomancers have been saying for a long, long time is now started to be backed up by science, and there is actually technology out there now where you can actually record these energies and fluctuations in the energies along these lines, and also at the actually at the sites themselves.
So we were just out at Michael Tellinger's, Adam's calendar and the stone circles, and there's amazing energy there. It shows a reading on the needle, right for I guess a GPS, or is that?
No, it was affecting the compasses there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this is something that Andrew Collins, he bought some sort of this specialist compass down there. And also a couple of other people who just has standard compasses. There's certainly magnetic anomalies there. So it's right. A question, I mean, the stone itself appears to be quite magnetic, certainly has iron in it, so that could cause a magnetic effect itself. But there's no reason, it needs to be checked out really by geologists to confirm this. But there's no reason there couldn't be a magnetic anomaly there, because it's got the classic traits of what's called a conductivity discontinuity, without actually knowing, without actually testing it properly to find this out, without talking to any geologists yet. And what that is, this is something that John Burke and other researchers have looked into, is where two different types of geology in the ground meet. Often when these these energy lines or electric currents kind of move through the Earth, where they meet a different type of geology which is less conductive, often it creates electric charge or drop in magnetism, all these different possible variations, and this can create a kind of effect coming out of the ground, and often the stones manipulate that or amplify that.
Okay.
And it's got many different purposes attached with that. We could sort of have a look at, you know, different aspects of that too.
Right. So, but you didn't actually have a chance to do any dowsing out at those sites yet.
I did some dowsing at Adam's Calendar.
You did?
Yeah, yeah, and it's something, I mean, immediately I just did a walk round and just to check how many of these energy currents are actually going through the site, and I found 5 quite quickly. And you get that a lot at quite large, quite powerful ancient sites. You do get up to 5, you can get a lot more. And I found 5 all equally spaced, kind of going through the centre. So it's quite busy, and where the 2 great rocks are in the centre, the really tall ones, the uprights, that's where they kind of all met, within that little sort of alcove. And so I think the rocks, you know, one of the purposes I think of Adam's Calendar and all these other megalithic sites was to actually harness that energy. So I think that's possibly why they were in the middle of that particular site. And plus the fact that it's on the edge of a cliff, that's immediately interesting from an energetic perspective, because suddenly there's nothing there and all the energy is building up into one area.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's actually could be, and there could be a lot of stuff going on under the ground energetically, so I don't know if there's any caves or anything. Be interesting to know.
Yeah, actually they when they flew around it, we noted that there were seemed to be some openings in the rock.
Really?
Down
okay.
Yeah.
Okay, well that'd be interesting. That'd be worth somehow getting in there, getting some
Right.
climbing equipment and having a go, because there could well be something underneath there then, because I find it fascinating that because there's not many sites you get like that are right on the edge of something like that, and I think that's got significance, especially because it's facing east, I believe, and in the distance you have those 3 potential pyramids.
Yes.
And so I'll be very interested in seeing what's in between them, you know, from a geomantic perspective.
Well, did you, you know, I don't know that much about geomancy, but is it possible that you get, is there an intuitive side to it in which you would maybe tap into the idea that not only was there something happening at the Adam's Calendar site, but that the relationship of the pyramids, that there was something there? I mean, can you tap into that?
Yeah, it's possible, I think. If you spend enough time there, I think you need to spend a good, you know, a day there at least, but possibly a couple of 3 days. And we were there. We were very busy. Lots of people,
right.
You know, people talking and explaining things. That's why I think, you know, it's good, you need time for that, you know, or you know, you need to meditate or do whatever works for you, really. But with the dowsing rods, it's very handy because you get an immediate response just by having a clear mind and really being clear about what you're looking for, what different types of levels of earth energies or ley lines you're looking for. So as long as you've got the clear mind and the clear intention of what you're looking for, you should be able to find it. So I just set the task of finding earth energy currents that are usually related to ancient sites, and immediately I found these 5 just by walking around. But there was also telluric energies there as well, which is something you get at a lot of sites. And these are much smaller energy lines, really, and they're actually part of the magnetic field of the planet. But in the morning they kind of break up into millions of these lines all over the planet, and often you can actually control the movement of them by placing stones in the landscape and different objects in the landscape. And so there's certainly that kind of activity going on there, and I wouldn't surprise me if that site was used as a kind of energy system generator type thing, possibly to enhance seed quality, which is something that, you know, I've been looking into, realising there's something going on with these sites, and the energies are still present there. You can actually enhance seeds and then you get a better yield from them if you plant them. And so it looks like all the signs are there that possibly one of the uses was for that.
Okay, back in England, have you done a lot of the geomancy around the sacred sites like Avebury and even Stonehenge?
Yeah. Sean Kerwin and I, yes, we've done that a lot. We sort of work as a team, but he's like a professional geomancer. He does it for a living,
right?
And we've been on and off researching this for the last 6 or 7 years. And yeah, I mean, the more sites you go to, the more you realise. I always take my rods just to check things. Often, you know, if you're not tuned in or it's too busy, you find it hard to pick up readings. But generally, you can pick them up quite quickly if you keep practicing.
Well, do you try to go like early in the morning or late at night when there's less, you know, sort of static interference?
Yeah, I mean, we have done some tests, testing it like from sunset to sunrise. And also during the day at the peak of the solar peak in the sky. And yeah, you do get fluctuations, but it's quite hard to discern because they actually fluctuate over the whole year, and depending on like the weather or the way the energy is moving through the, you know, it's so many variations. But this is something that John Burke tested scientifically, which I thought was absolutely fascinating. In their research for the book Seed of Knowledge, Stone of Plenty, they went in, you know, it felt like they were kind of expert geomancers who were going in there from a scientific perspective. But what they actually were, they were actually scientists who'd been studying crop circles, and I thought that was fascinating because they found out all their major discoveries through studying crop circles, and so I was quite compelled when I heard that. So I read their book and realised the profound and the significance of what the research they did when they actually took these magnetometers and electrovolt readers to these sites and recorded all the fluctuations in electric charge and magnetism, and found that they were still functioning, these sites as such. And so they decided to look at, follow up the legends of a lot of these sites where people would come and place offerings of seeds and grains from hundreds of miles around. Often they travel and with pilgrimage to these sites, but actually they were going there for a purpose, so they could use this technology to make sure they had food for the year. They take a bag of seeds with them, place them in the site for between 30 minutes and 2 hours, depending on what it's designed for. Take them away. When they planted them, the ones they planted that had been in the sacred site before would get up to 3 or 4 times more yield, grow twice as fast,
really?
Be frost resistant, and be a much higher quality. And so that alone is absolutely fascinating. It gives a reason for these sites, why they were built to last and why they were so important and why so much effort was put into them. It was actually for survival. It was actually so they could continue to survive and grow more food than they needed.
That's a really interesting approach. There's also the idea, because I just recently did an interview with a Sri Lankan healer.
Okay.
Who uses water in a similar way. In other words, charges the water, actually puts it near his heart. He charges the water with healing energies. Then he hands the glass of water to the person that has, whatever healing needs, and then they hold it next to their heart and actually receive the healing from the water.
Okay.
So it's a similar transference of energy happening. And in this case, he's actually worked on a theory of charging the water and then sending it, through the mail or through whatever, miles away where the person can get it that way. It would be a similar thing, right? Yeah,
it kind of makes a lot of sense. Yeah, it kind of does fit in with this, with that theory actually. But one of the things as well with these, because these sites are obviously made by people,
right?
Yeah, they're not natural. They're made by people, so the interaction was there from the very start. They were harnessing and manipulating the energies and I find it just absolutely fascinating that the intention that they put in it is still present today. It still works. They still work as these energy generators, and so I find that really, it's almost like, and so that proves to me these were highly compassionate people as well. They were looking out for future generations. They weren't just looking out for themselves like we do. Like, it's the current nature of reality, society now. And so I see that, I kind of find that quite profound. And also they are obviously built to last. So they were making sure that everything would flow properly.
Actually, I wonder if that's the significance of why they use such heavy stones. In other words, the idea that if you move them, you throw off the energy of what they're trying to create.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, it makes sense to me that it's not just it's not just one site that you go there for your seeds. You know, that's one aspect of it. But I think there's a much bigger picture with these sites, and it actually enhances. This is what geomancy and feng shui and all this stuff's really about. It's about the whole landscape. Okay. And it covers often the whole country even. You know, that they're actually manipulating and working with these energies for the highest good of the landscape, so there's as much harmony or enchantment as possible. And so when you, like for example, this is just going back to the seeds thing, there were some tests done on some farms in Australia by a woman called Alana Moore, and she's done a book called Stone Age Farming, and most of the reports are in there. And she placed all these sort of small stone circles, like a few feet wide, just small stones the size of bricks or something, all over her farm, all this basalt rock. And she realised, and they tested all the energies there before they put them in, doused it and stuff. And then afterwards, like a few months later, they tested it again and found out all the energies had organised themselves, all the earth energies, all the telluric currents into these harmonic patterns, and everything has started growing better and quicker and much more thicker and healthier. And so if you look at that on a much broader scale, these stone circles and standing stones and dolmens and other such sites, pyramids, etc., over the greater landscape of just say one country like Britain, then the same effect is happening, but all over the country.
Right.
And so the whole country has this energy kind of holding itself, you know, this sort of harmonic and enchanted energy, which was intended by these brilliant people back in Neolithic times and Bronze Age times.
Absolutely. Well, when you have a major site such as Stonehenge, that's got to be doing like amping it up also. Have you sort of thought about that or gone into that?
About Stonehenge in particular, you mean?
Well, no, about the idea that, you know, like the Great Pyramid or the pyramids themselves, the fact that they go megalithic, to quote your you know, conference. I mean, in other words, Stonehenge, Zimbabwe ruins. This is where they're going really planetary wide. That's how large the sites are.
Yeah, you could say that. I mean, some people have this with Avebury Stone Circle in England, which is huge. You know, it's
is that the one like the snake?
Yes, you have the main Great Stone Circle, which probably had 99 stones in. Within that are two stone circles, much smaller ones. But even one of them small stone circles in the centre is the same size as Stonehenge. That's how big Avebury is. It's absolutely huge. There are bigger stone circles. There's the one in Morocco that Robert Temple's been talking about, and also the one in Albania is almost that size as well, which Andrew Collins mentioned. But yes, I mean, with Avebury, some people do suggest is that was like the geodetic centre of southern Britain, and that was also connected because there's a great energy currents that go across the country, the Michael and Mary lines, and Avebury is almost in the dead centre of that. So these famous energy currents that go from east to west all the way across the country. They think that was like the hub of it, almost the creation point of these energies. And from there they went in the two different directions and actually sort of manipulated and put sites along them to maintain this particular corridor of energy.
What about, I'd like you to talk more about the Michael and Mary lines, because I've heard of that, but I don't know much about it.
Okay, well, initially in 1969, John Michel, who's like visionary antiquarian genius. He died a couple of years ago, unfortunately, and he's actually the inspiration for Megalithomania. He came to our first few conferences, but he discovered this straight line alignment that went between Glastonbury Tor and Borough Mump, which is like a smaller Glastonbury Tor, about 12 miles away from Glastonbury itself. And he realised if he extended that line across the landscape, going both ways, sort of slightly northeast and southwest, he found that he stretched it across the whole country. He found lots and lots of sites, churches, megaliths, Avebury and other places, all dedicated to St Michael, or St George, some of them as well, which are both associated with energy and things like this, and dragons and stuff. And then they found...
I'm sorry to stop you here, but what do you mean they found they were dedicated to St George? I mean, how did they find this?
Well, because a lot of them are churches, and they're often dedicated, most of them are dedicated to
saints.
So
they have churches built in the areas?
Yeah, all over Britain there's churches, but these particular ones that happen to fall upon this alignment, a majority of them were St Michael churches dedicated to St Michael. And so this is how the name the St Michael line came. But also St Michael's Mount is at the start point, or almost at the start point down in Cornwall, of this energy line, of this straight line rather, this ley line.
Okay, but who is this St Michael?
Well, Saint Michael goes back into Christian times. There's many different aspects, but he was kind of like the light being, and there's lots of different interpretations of it. I'm not 100% clear on the original sort of who he was exactly.
Okay.
But also you get this other great alignment that goes through from Cornwall all the way through Europe. But then most of the sites there are either dedicated to St Michael or Apollo. So there's all these different sort of connections there. So originally he discovered this straight line, and it wasn't an energy line as far as you know, just a straight line like a ley line or a surveying alignment. And then, I think it was 20 or so years later, Paul Broadhurst and Hamish Miller decided to go and dowse this line to see if there was anything energy associated with it, rather than just it being a straight ley line, which aren't usually associated with energies. And so they did that, and they found this great kind of masculine energy current weaving around it. And they went all the way up to Avebury, 100 or 200 miles, and found that when they got to Avebury, they found this other great energy current, which was feminine, and they called that the Mary line. And then they had to track that back all the way to Cornwall again. And they found that so you've got to imagine the straight line alignment that John Michel discovered, and you have these two interlocking energy currents that stretch across, about 4 or 5 miles sometimes. They drift apart and then come back again and cross. And where they cross is where all the major sites are.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and also they'd often cross exactly, not just two energy lines, they also cross with the straight line alignment as well. So you get these major power points formed all the way across the country, all the way up to East Anglia, up to the Norfolk coast. And so there's several different aspects here. There's the straight line, and then there's two great energy currents that weave around it all the way across the country. And the research I've done since then is that, and this is what Hamish Miller confirmed, that these energy currents do in fact continue up into Russia. So that I thought, well, they must be global. They can't just, when you look on the map of England and you see them, you can't imagine they're just there. They must go further. And then this guy, Robert Coon, who again, he lived in Glastonbury, he had this visionary idea that they go all the way around the planet and mapped it out where they go. And he called it the rainbow serpent.
Oh, okay.
This is where, because there's a second energy current as well, but which doesn't go through England at all. But this rainbow serpent goes through Uluru, you see, in Australia, and many other sites all around the planet, Lake Titicaca, Bolivia, etc. And so he called it the rainbow serpent, and that was just the name that stuck with it. And it's something that I've been researching as I go travelling to see if I can trace this line, or trace these lines across different countries. And to my surprise, most places I go where they're supposed to be, they seem to be there. And I've tracked them in Lake Titicaca, south, in the Bolivian-Peru border, on the island of the Sun in particular. But I didn't get a chance to do much other dowsing and research out there. But I think they look like they go through many other sites as well, famous sites in Peru.
So when you do this, I think I have mosquitoes in this area. When you're doing this, you're actually going to the site to test whether the line is there, and you're using the dowsing rods.
Yeah.
And how do you know at that point? Do you get a reading of some kind?
Yeah, I mean, with the dowsing, you go there with the strong intention of trying to pick up these particular energy lines that you've been researching, that you know all about. And I've been on them before, so you have a resonance with them. Okay. You know what they feel like as well. So
that's actually a question I have, though. You actually feel the energies.
I do now. I didn't when I started, but you get to know it. You get drawn, and you become, the more you get accustomed to it.
Because I feel energies a lot. And I can feel energy in my hands, and I can feel energy off rocks and all of that. Yeah. So you do get that sensation.
Yeah, I certainly do. Yeah. Okay. At many different sites. But the dowsing rods are just useful because you really need to. If it's a busy time or there's lots of people, if you're tired, often it's hard to be sensitive and feel stuff and tune in. But with the rods, you just got an instant answer. And you can find them as long as you can clear your mind and just think about what you're looking for. And so I find the rods are incredibly useful for that.
So you go to these sites, you sort of find out if they resonate. Do you get a reading like how much? I assume it doesn't give you numbers, right?
Not exactly, but you can go quite far into it and ask question after question after question, and it'll give you an answer. Whether it's the correct answer, it's difficult to know, but you certainly get an answer if you ask.
So is there a crossing over point in which using, I don't know if it's a GPS or some kind of, like you said, a magnetic readout through science. And like if you went to this and you did all this testing and you sort of mapped it out using the dowsing rods, and then if you went in with other instrumentation and tried to cross-correlate, would it work?
I think it could work, yeah. I think it has worked in some sites, because I've been to some sites, for instance, that John Burke went on when he did his research, and I went back there after I'd read his book. And yeah, you pick up the same thing as long as you know what you're looking for. But I mean, with sort of technology, I think it's harder for that to pick up energies that fluctuate, because these energies move around as well. They don't necessarily stay in the same place day to day. They can actually shift slightly, and a bit like water moving around. And streams sort of shaping themselves through the land slightly differently. So I think there's more to it than that. I think there's another level to it as well when it gets to dowsing and feeling energies, because often it's got a spiritual aspect to it, and it's not just about readings as such. I think there's something else going on with these lines. It's not necessarily just energy lines to charge up seeds that we use as a technology. I think there's another dimension to it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, there seems to be, I guess, there's the sound aspect, there's the healing aspect, in my view. There's almost this sense of you could think of it as a spa, like a health spa. That's what I noticed in the stone circles, for example, that Michael's up in, where Michael took us here in South Africa. But on top of it, there's also the multidimensional aspect, the idea that you could actually, in some of these places, shifting dimensions is easier. There's a vortex created, and I wonder if you've gone into that. Do
you mean in your mind, like a visionary state, shamanic state?
Like you can access that. You can, and along those lines, I have to tell you, because you recently took this trip to Central America, where you went sort of tracing the Olmec, the influence of the Olmec culture. That appears to be what you, I don't know how you would phrase it, but as just a synchronicity, I went to an exhibit in Los Angeles prior to coming here with a girlfriend, and they had the Olmec carvings. They actually had some really big, they actually transported some really big
did they?
Olmec heads. And what happened was, because I do feel energies, here it was a museum, and usually that kind of place won't have a lot of energies unless it's built on some kind of a ley line or some crossing point. But the both of us felt, and she's not even a person who normally feels these energies, we both felt tremendous force field around certain of the Olmec,
That's very interesting, because this is something that happened to me, the same thing. I went to a place called Villahermosa, the town in the Gulf Coast of Mexico, and it's quite near this ancient Olmec site called La Venta, but because the original site was going to be damaged by oil, the oil companies moving in, they moved all the stones to this park in the town centre, and it's really beautiful and laid out really well. And there was one particular Olmec sculpture, altar type thing, that had these snake symbolism all around it, and also it had this sort of priestly sort of, I don't know what it was, emerging from this big square stone, about the size of this table. It was huge. Yeah. And me and my friend Ivan walked up to it, and when we were about 10 feet away, suddenly we felt this powerful energy field all around it, and it was palpable. You could touch it. Yeah. You could actually feel where it was with your hand. We weren't dowsing, it was by pure chance. Yeah. And I was like, wow, this is strange, because it's not actually at the original site. It's almost like this stone has been charged with this energy. Yes. And somehow that charge stays in there, and only, I think, people who are tuned up to it or something, or it could be some karmic thing, it could even be a spiritual aspect to it, that it resonates with that particular person when they reach it, whereas other people just walking by it didn't feel anything. Right. Whereas then they might get a sensation with another stone or another site. So but that particular one, that's really interesting you said that. It's the same experience. Yes. I mean, the one you saw, it wasn't actually like a large sort of flat-topped altar with this sort of priestly person emerging from it. It wasn't. Do you remember what stones they were?
No, I remember one of them. I remember the heads had a definite resonance and an energy around them, but there was one in particular that had. I think that it actually wasn't a head. So what happened was I was kind of surprised. I went close to it thinking, oh, this will probably be, not much going on. And I was just like, wow. And what happened was, it was almost like in being in contact with it, it happened to my friend too.
Okay.
It started to pull us into like another dimension.
That's
if I stood there any longer, I would have, it would have been embarrassing.
Okay.
Because I would have started tripping out so much that and I got a little of that at Adam's calendar, I have to say. In certain points in the calendar, I feel that there's a sense where the dimensions, maybe a dimensional curtain or veil starts to thin, and you start going like this. Okay. Is the best way I can describe it.
Okay, well, going back to the, just mentioning these Olmec stones, there's two sites. I mean, do you know which sites? There's San Lorenzo, which is used to be the ancient capital, and then there's Levanto. I would imagine some of these stones came from both of them.
I imagine,
and there's some interesting stuff with both those sites, because this great global energy current, which is not the rainbow serpent that goes through Britain and around the world, through Australia, etc., South America. There's another one that's kind of opposite to that, goes around the other way around the world, through Mexico, through North America, all the way back round, underneath South Africa, and back up through New Zealand, all that kind of area.
Does it have a name?
This is called the plume serpent energy line, this one.
Oh, okay, like Quetzalcoatl.
Yeah, because it goes through that area. And this line, actually, it meets up with the rainbow serpent in Lake Titicaca, where they cross.
Oh, wow.
But so the plume serpent goes through Mexico and Guatemala, and it goes through some of the Olmec sites, particularly Levanto. And so this energy line, and the stone I saw that had been moved from that site, could well have been charged by that global current over thousands of years, and then that charge stays in it. And also at Levanto, the actual ancient site of Levanto, there's supposed to be a gravitational and magnetic anomaly there, and you get the same, and there's a very powerful magnetic anomaly at San Lorenzo. So obviously they were into this, they understood these energies and they worked with it.
Yes.
And I think they must have worked with it on a global scale, the Olmecs, because the Olmecs, as most people are aware, the facial features of these great colossal stone heads are not of local people who have ever been in that country.
Exactly.
They've got negroid features, and often white, and they're often white or Caucasians with beards, which people don't have beards in Central America. And so it seems like, I get the impression these lions were there was global knowledge about them, and they were harnessing them like a power network. And so I think there's something to do with that.
No doubt about it. Well, I watched your presentation of the Olmecs, and I did study that area a long time ago in college. And one thing I can tell you, which I didn't hear in your presentation, I just want to say that the shape of the mouth that goes, it's very unusual. It goes kind of like that,
yeah.
and a lot of those carvings and a lot of the Olmec. That's called the jaguar mouth.
Okay, yeah.
And the idea is that the jaguar, the symbolism of the jaguar in South America, Central and South America, you know what it symbolizes, that it's a door into the other side.
Okay, that's interesting.
It's into the dimensions. That's what, I actually wrote a song called Jaguar. It's the theme, the Camelot theme, as it happens.
Oh, that's interesting.
Which I wrote before Camelot, but nonetheless, the story is. And even then, I was tapping into it intuitively. I didn't know literally what I was talking about.
Okay.
But the jaguar is famous throughout that area as being a symbol of the door into the unknown, into the other dimensions.
Because you get a lot of that in most Olmec sites. There's been artifacts and jade pendants that have got something called the weir jaguar or the were jaguar.
Yes.
Where it's like a combination of human and jaguar.
Right.
They have a sort of like shape-shifting almost. So.
And that's why they make the mouth that way. I just wanted to say on some of those statues.
That's interesting.
On purpose. That's again giving them that crossover potential. And it's open. Slightly open, the mouth, and the idea being, that it's a doorway.
Okay.
So, I just wanted to throw that out. But it's very interesting, this idea that all of these sacred sites, one of the things that happened, we just did an interview not that long ago in Egypt, right? And what happens is that I don't know if this happened, because you went on a tour after that as well.
Yeah.
And what happened was we went to meditate in some of the temples, and actually at that time, the guards forced us out. They actually told us to stop meditating. They wouldn't let us, and they actually wanted us to leave.
Yeah.
And what seemed to be happening, Carmen and I talked about this, is the idea that at some of these sacred sites now, Stonehenge is another perfect example. They're roping them off. They're not allowing people to go in and access the energies. And what happens, in my view, is that as we enter this time, in which the Earth is entering this area of the galaxy, that it's being charged up in a whole nother way by the incoming energies. And I did an interview with Paul Laviolette, if you know anything about the superwave and all of this. So the idea being that we as individuals, or even small groups, can go into some of these sacred sites and amplify our energies. And then create change of all kinds, whether it be in our own DNA or beyond that.
That's interesting. This is links with some research I was doing a few years ago, where a lot of people realised this whole law of attraction thing. For instance, when you go to sites, that they found that they could, if they tried to manifest, like intentions about what they wanted in their life when they were at a sacred site, they found that it happened much quicker, as though it was amplifying something. It was amplifying intention. I think that might be why they're being closed off, because they know they have this power. These are power places.
Yes.
They are power points on the planet. And you mentioned the cosmic energy coming into these sites. There's been quite a lot of research done on that regarding, one example is the Round Towers in Ireland. This guy called Philip Callaghan back in the 70s and 80s was researching this. And he found that they acted like cosmic antennas, and they were drawing this kind of energy in and actually spreading it through the landscape, again for crops. And like fertility purposes, actually help with the landscape and the farming there. But also, we're now realising, a lot of researchers is that these energies we're talking about, all these earth energies and these electric charge that happens, all these orbs that appear, that actually they have an effect on the state of consciousness and the mind. And there's been now, this is John Burke's, he's been doing some brilliant tests on this. I found that you can go into altered states where the best place to put your seeds is in the site is at the same place to go and sit to get altered states, especially at certain times of day when the energy is strongest, and it actually affects the consciousness and it puts you into an altered state. And they found this at some of the Vision Quest sites in North America, and they found that where there was all these cave paintings all congregated in this one little area in this cave, when they did the test of where the person would have to have stood to paint them, that's where the energy was strongest, and they were getting the visions and the inspiration. And so this energy is also inspirational and puts you into a shamanic state as well.
Excellent. Well, there's also, this is kind of going on a little more on the dark side, but the idea has always been, Great Britain has been famous for this, for the cult using for black magic, or even for white magic for that matter, and fairy circles for, and dancing and all that. Acts going to these places, conducting ceremonies, dancing, whatever it is, in order to again put one into, or a whole group into a shamanic state, or an altered state of consciousness where certain rituals could be performed. Almost the idea that they didn't need, wine or other drugs, simply because going to that place puts them in that state.
Yeah, that's a good point. In England, for instance, just to discuss that, there's a lot of natural psychedelic mushrooms grow all over the place every year, and so I think even back in prehistoric times, they had access to that kind of thing. But there's the problem with Britain and trying to work out what they were doing back in prehistoric times is there's just nothing in writing. There's no evidence. There's no codexes like you get in the Maya lands, for instance. There's nothing written down, and even the oral traditions have all been destroyed now. And the Druids, we don't even know what the Druids were doing, 500 or 600 to 1,000 years ago. And so I believe that it was the same worldwide, that shamans worked with these sites. They were built by shaman priests, astronomers, kind of geomancers. There was all the skills that were incorporated. But I also get a sense that a lot of them, the psychedelic, nature of it was very strong then, and has been ever since. You get that in Mexico as well. The Olmecs are famous for it. They take San Lorenzo. They found all these Bufo marinus toad bones, that had all been, and so they thought it was just, that's very strange, why would that be? Then they realised this type of toad is also, there's loads of stone effigies of that down in Izapa and in southern Guatemala and all the sites which are later Olmec sites. And this toad is, if you excrete the substance from its shoulders, you have to harass it, and then it excretes this poison from its shoulders. And then when you smoke it, it's actually the strongest psychedelic on the planet, 5-MeO-DMT. So they were obviously doing something with that, and down in all these other sites as well. And many of these sites have these stone carvings of the psilocybin or magic mushroom from Mexico as well.
Yeah.
And so it seems like, and then the more you look into this, the more you look into the ancient world and this type of, these ancient sites, the more evidence there is for this. I think there's even a little carving at Stonehenge, which is one little clue, right at the bottom of one of the stones. I think it's Stonehenge, and it's actually a little mushroom.
Really?
Yeah.
But is it, was it added later?
Who knows?
We don't know.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, no idea. I mean, obviously there's a lot of people been taking them since.
Sure.
Not just then.
Well, let me ask you this. Stonehenge, did you happen to get a chance ever, like, I assume you grew up in England, right?
Yeah.
So they didn't always rope it off, right?
No, it's only in the last couple of decades, or last decade even,
Were you
I think.
ever able to go into it when it wasn't roped off?
I have been in. We've had private access, in our little groups for Megalithomania, our little tours we do. Yeah, but we also go there on the summer solstice, and that's when you get 10,000 people partying hard all night long in the stones, and that is quite an experience.
Right.
Because you're raising the energy on the solstice. You're doing, this is what we were doing back then. It's just repetition. It's like going around in circles here. And it charges it all up, and they're absorbing the energy of this peak time of year where the energy is strongest. It's almost like something in us is like demanding we're going in there. We're going to do this, whatever the authorities say. And they've realised that there's nothing can stop the people now. They have to let us in. And so I like that side of it, that these have such a power, these sites, that they magnetise you so strongly that even like the authorities cannot do anything about it. And I think this is happening all over the world. You get the popularity of these sites is awesome. You just look at the statistics of people who visit these sites over the years, over the last couple of decades, and they're increasing every year. And so some people say it's becoming less popular, but I think it's actually a whole different generation is now coming in and realising the power of these sites and the magnetic attraction.
But to get back to this, because actually when I was in Egypt recently, what has happened is I've been there 3 times now, ever since around 2000, forget when exactly I first went. And each time I go, the number of people that are going is absolutely escalating. Now, obviously, with what's going on now, I'm sure the tourism is down. But right before this happened, when we were there, in fact, it was mobbed, absolutely mobbed. I mean, I've never seen anything like it. It was amazing. And a lot of these people, I have to say, aren't aware of any of the stuff we're talking about.
Yeah, I know.
They're just going because
cool.
they don't know why. They just think now I'm going to take a trip to go see the pyramids type of thing.
Yeah.
Maybe more like your parents at the time.
Yeah.
And yet, what I was thinking was that something in them is realizing that there's something amplifying suddenly. And they're suddenly going, wait a minute, now I have to go there. And so I think it's really interesting that this whole thing is happening in the Middle East, and there are a number, I don't know how much time you've spent in the Middle East besides Egypt, but there are a number of heavy-duty power places, in Egypt, in Jordan, in Israel, of course, and all of that, and certainly Iraq, right? And I would say that the reason that we went into Iraq was simply to take control of the Stargate and so on.
Okay.
So you could possibly put together a conspiracy theory that would say that not only are they trying to keep people out, because the access to the intention and the power that is there, which is also the access to freedom, because if you access other dimensions, if you recognize the multidimensionality that we have by being in these places and being drawn in these different ways, then you begin to become a bigger being in essence. And so of course they're sort of trying to dumb that down. But on top of it, in terms of what may be going on the planet, the Middle East seems to be kind of a center place, a trigger zone, if you will. And I'm just wondering if now moving militaries in as a result of the populations. Do you see what I'm going with this? Would you have any thoughts on that?
Well, obviously Iraq's been like the centre. Because that's supposed to be the oldest known civilizations on the planet, etc. One thing I'm interested in with what's been happening recently, especially with Egypt, is the fact that it just makes me wonder, because I'm sure the ancients, when they set these intentions at these ancient sites, they were setting intentions for the future. This is kind of how most of these stones are crystalline, so you can program them. So it wouldn't surprise me if they put programs into them to do something in the future. I think that the megaliths in England, for instance, were programmed to create crop circles at certain times in certain era, just to send a message to us to remember time to something going on. So there's a reason to be waking up here. And so maybe something was happening with the pyramids and the ancient sites in North Africa and the Middle East. And I find it really interesting that the Giza in Cairo is the geodetic centre of the planet. It's like it's the most landmass in all directions go out from Giza. That is the centre gravitationally of the landmass of the planet, and that's very intriguing. But it's also the geodetic centre from a sort of Earth mysteries point of view, where all sites around the world seem to be mapped precisely from the Giza Plateau, the Great Pyramid in particular. And the more you look into this, the more correlations keep coming up. And you have to admit, the line that was on north to the South Pole through the Giza Plateau, was the ancient prime meridian of the planet. And I think that was also where all the energy lines were designed and manipulated from, and all the ley lines, etc. So it wouldn't surprise me if the revolution or the rebellion that's taken place there is going to spread around the whole world, because that's where it all began, and it's just repeating itself in a different way. I get a sense that that's kind of what's happening. There's something big happening.
I agree with you. In fact, it's almost like, and I have to say we've got like a nightingale or something. It's almost dark and suddenly birds are chirping. It's really interesting. But it's like a stone thrown in a pond, and the stone is thrown exactly where, for example, maybe you could say the Great Pyramid is, which seems to me to be the fulcrum of the planet, for lack of a better word, and that the ripples are then consequently going out from there.
Yeah.
So
that makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
Yeah, that's actually a really exciting thought. Okay. Well, fascinating. Can you? It's interesting to talk to you about what you're doing with the ley lines and all these lines, and then the fact that you went to investigate the Olmecs, because it's not an obvious jump. You know what I'm saying? And I just wondered, was that just like a separate line of inquiry that you were stimulated to follow, or is this something you've been doing for a while? And was it literally to follow that line, that the Mary and Michael
the plumed
line?
serpent one? Yeah. Not really. No. I mean, I'm just I organised this Megalithomania conference, and I'm fascinated by any ancient cultures anywhere on the planet. I'll go anywhere and research them. But I've been to Mexico before, and I just had this opportunity to go there because there was this big conference in Cancun that we were kind of going to go to as well, about this 2012 conference. And so we decided to go there that winter and actually explore many of the sites there. And I was just looking for like anything, ancient, pre-Mayan. I was looking for, the whole kind of, not necessarily just Olmec, but anything really ancient, any evidence of that. And that's kind of what my intention and focus was. I was also obviously always on the lookout for energy lines and alignments and see what I could find. Everywhere I go, I do. But something just pulled me into the Olmec heartland, and I just found that it was the most powerful place. I feel like I've got a connection there, when you get that,
Yes.
And I've been to the Maya lands before, like Yucatan and all the other sites when I went in 2003, but nothing really compelled me apart from one site, that was Tikal in Guatemala. That's the one that really blew me away when I went there in 2000. I had this full-on past life experience there with 3 other people, and we all just congregated and met one evening, and suddenly we all knew each other. We were the only people there. It was like 5 o'clock at night, and it was closing. So we all ran into the site, got lost in there, and realised we'd all been here before. It's incredible. And so that's the one place I had the connection at. And then the Olmec sites are the place I've had the other strong connection at. I recently found out, actually, interestingly, the earliest pyramids, possibly at Tikal, the Lost World Pyramid it's called, they think now was an Olmec construction. And so I've got a lot, and they realise a lot of the very early potentially Mayan sites could have been Olmec themselves, and they actually were much more flourishing than people realise. And the calendars, the earliest reference to the long count calendar, the one that ends in December 2012, is from Olmec carvings. So they potentially invented that calendar and created it, or they learnt it from someone even earlier, because it starts way back in 3113 BC, which is supposed to be before the Olmecs, although we think that perhaps they were there too then, as well.
I mean, one thing about the Olmecs, which is really strange, is of course that they make these massive heads, and also they look like, well, to me they look like they're wearing helmets of some kind. Yeah. And so in a sense, spacemen come to mind. And then their physicality, in which they look kind of like sumo wrestlers, I mean, that's the kind of being that it appears that they were. In other words, were the people that created the art the people that were being depicted? There's always that question.
Yeah.
And do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so it's almost like some gods or some people visited and then went again, and they were depicting them rather than themselves.
Maybe.
Yeah.
I don't know.
No, it's an interesting point, because one of the things, one of the legends about the whole area is the legend of Quetzalcoatl.
Yes.
And he was supposed to, he was like a tall, white-looking guy, pale features, beard, long robes, blue eyes, very almost like albino, and he was like glowing with energy. He came with a band of followers on what was called a raft of serpents, and he turned up on the Gulf Coast area, which is where all the Olmecs were, and actually created and taught lots of people and travelled through that whole area, teaching these people all these different arts of civilization and other aspects, megalithic construction, agriculture, even vegetarianism, things like that. And so it's very it's almost got a Christian kind of tinge to it, but this was much, much earlier.
Right.
Every culture in that part of the Americas, and even in South America, you get the same legends with Viracocha emerging from Lake Titicaca on a raft of serpents.
Yes.
And so I find it really fascinating that after about 20 or so years, they're supposed to have disappeared again and gone off again. So they kind of visited, did whatever, and then went away again. And where they left from the Gulf Coast in Mexico on a raft of serpents was a place called Coatzacoalcos, which is called serpents, which means serpent sanctuary. And so then when you sort of take another look from a different perspective and think, well, was it legendary? Was it actual people visiting from all over the planet? Was it a global thing? Symbology is incredibly relevant when you look at these earth energy currents, because the energy line comes in the Gulf Coast and goes through all these Olmec sites. It goes all the way down into South America to the Viracocha sites, and all the way through Brazil or back around the world. And you think, well, actually, is it a sort of legend associated with that? These, or did people turn up then and actually worked with these energies through the landscape? Because it's called the plumed serpent, this energy line as well. And Quetzalcoatl and Viracocha were the plumed serpent.
Yes. Well, I actually want to talk about that. I'm glad you brought it up, because the plumed serpent, this is also symbolic of the awakened Kundalini energy. And the snake that comes up from the back of the spine and comes up through the head chakra. And the idea is the cobra is often depicted on the head. The feather, in fact, Klaus Dana was talking about, he always sees this, he called it a leaf coming out of the top of people's head, but it's actually, it's more of a feather. What he doesn't, or he's not addressing, is the idea that an awakened, enlightened being who glows has awakened Kundalini energy. So, and it is associated all the time with a serpent and so on. And the bird, so you see the serpent really morphing into the bird or the eagle. The feathers, the plumed serpent, it's a serpent that has become awakened and has to do with being connected with the head chakra and thereby connecting to the Creator through the crown chakra. So that is a lot of the symbolism also. But this man, you know, it's interesting because the physicality of this particular man seems, you know, because he wrote on this, I don't know, we don't know whether it's an analogy for something or it's literal, but the raft of snakes, as you say. And in Egypt, the Kundalini symbolism is equally as potent, and it's always depicted all over the place. And to me, simply because I've studied this in depth, no one seems to recognize these connections. They don't talk about it anyway. I don't know if it's because it's not popular to talk about or what.
There are a lot of connections between Egypt and Mexico when it comes to the symbolism you're talking about. You get, if you start looking carefully, you find that there's a huge amount of correlation, especially to do with the serpent and the feathers, and this keeps coming back. You get this all over the world, and I think this was a global kind of megalithic civilization's kind of high priestly caste. Actually, they were the serpent people. And any symbolism they had, they took with them. And I believe they travelled around the world as well, and either they were marking or working with these energy lines, which I think was certainly a possibility. And this is how they became, all the symbolic stuff became involved with that. Or they were just teaching people how to work with the local energies. And you know, we just don't know. It's such a sort of vague area. But yeah, and there's no reason why that wasn't connected with the personal spiritual growth, the Kundalini awakening. I mean, that certainly makes a lot of sense. And also the psychedelic imagery you get when you take a lot of this type of DMT, the psilocybin mushrooms, South America, the ayahuasca. You often get bird and serpent visions constantly, often combined. And so, I mean, a friend of mine recently is actually being scientifically tested on with psilocybin in North America. Actually, at the moment, he's doing this test. He said he's never done it before. The first time he ever did it, which was like a couple of weeks ago, he had full-on serpent and bird imagery, and he became Quetzalcoatl, the plumed serpent, and was flying through the air. And so this whole, and so you realise even today people are getting it as well. Yeah,
it's actually embedded somehow it's embedded in these these subjects, the mind-altering substances.
Well, one of the areas of research I'm fascinated by, and I've written a book about, is the Earth grids phenomenon. This whole idea of a kind of energy system around the entire planet. Because in this discussion we've been talking about specific sites and countries, but actually it seems like there's a whole global version of this, which is something that's fascinated me for a decade or so. It was actually when I met some psychic children, these indigo kids in Hawaii back in 2003, they kind of tuned me up to the importance of understanding this grid and the geometries and things like that. And that kind of inspired me. I was already into the Earth mystery stuff at the time. And realising that, because actually in Hawaii, where this conference was, is actually a 19.5 degree point on a great star tetrahedron inside Earth, energetically. And it seems there are other geometries, other platonic solids, like the icosahedron has points that touch the surface on certain particular areas of the planet. And these are where strange magnetic anomalies and disappearances and fluctuations in gravity have occurred. And it seems to be like certain geometries have certain effects on that particular part of the planet. So that kind of really fascinated me, but bringing this earth energies thing into it, it makes you wonder if like the ancients were actually working on a global scale. I mean, possibly with the whole rainbow serpent and the plume serpent going all the way around the planet. Actually, maybe there's more to it than that. It was actually like they were working on mapping the earth, but at the same time, you know, harnessing the energy and enchanting the landscape as they moved across it, you know, by building these sites and harmonising the energy. And so there's many different aspects to the whole Earth grid thing. I mean, people really need to look at the little book I've done on it called Earth Grids, The Secret Patterns of Gaia's Sacred Sites. That covers everything. But it gets into all the maths and the science of it, as well as the geomancy and the earth energies aspects as well. So it's certainly worth, you know, if people go to these certain sites and travel the world, it's good to check where the grids are, because you can actually go to these points, you can check out the lines on them, you can actually go on Google Earth and actually download this grid program, all free, designed by William Becker and Beth Hargens, who are some of the original grid researchers. And if you just type in the names, for instance, you'll probably find it. We can have a link up on Project Camelot. And it's definitely really becomes really interesting. The more you study it, you just find all these correlations with where these sites are in ancient civilizations and where these grid points are as well. And it's not even just on Earth. I mean, the whole solar system, every planet has anomalies at certain degrees, latitude or longitude, which seem to match these geometries, these spherical geometries.
Yeah, I think it's the spot on Jupiter that ends up to be at something like 19.5.
Yeah, I mean, originally it was thought it was 19.5, but actually John Martineau and I, who's the editor of my book, we had a good look at that and we researched that, because Richard Hoagland once said it was 19.5, so we went along with that, and then we thought, well, we better double check this, and we found it's actually 22.5 degrees. But that's really interesting, because 22.5 degrees is a quarter of a quadrant of a quarter of a quarter of the planet.
I see.
So it's still a harmonic fraction, harmonic kind of geodetic point in itself.
Right.
So that's really interesting. So, but the 19.5 degree thing occurs on Mars with the Olympus Mons volcanoes. You also get cloud bands around Neptune at that latitude, and you get high solar flare activity at 19.5 degrees above and below the equator on the Sun. And so these geometries seem to be present wherever you look in different planetary bodies.
Okay, so have you also looked into the idea that sound can, in other words, if you play a musical instrument for, or you try to communicate. In other words, there's some idea that communication is facilitated by the energetics of lines connecting in certain places, or platonic solids, points that intersect. Have you ever gone into any of that?
Yeah, I mean, there's two different levels to look at it. First is archaeoacoustics. We actually go to one particular site, and you can do tests. It's something that people like Paul Devereux and others have done, and actually test the acoustics. And he's discovered at many sites all around the planet that they are tuned as though they were built with acoustics in mind, designed as acoustic kind of chambers as such. Another aspect of this, which is very interesting, is the whole idea of like the music of the spheres, planetary harmonies, planetary sounds that occur constantly. We can't hear them all because of our limited hearing range, but there is such a symphony of noise going on the planet all the time. Within the planet, with the Earth moving, the water, everything, then you get these spherics, tweaks and whistlers that all bounce around between the ionosphere and the surface of the planet. And they're also connected with the magnetic field, and actually connected with the Earth energies as well, which is really bizarre. And they create this constant symphony or hum around the planet. You also get these ring-like oscillations that just no one can explain where they come from. They seem to come from the centre of the Earth and just move across the planet, sort of from one side over to the other side, every few seconds. You also get the Schumann resonance as well across the whole planet. So you have this constant, you have all these different levels of sound and noise, and which potentially could create a symphony of geometry through the nature and the science of cymatics, where sound creates form.
Yes.
Into these different geometries, and this is something Hans Jenny's done at length many years ago, and it's been researched quite thoroughly ever since. That if you vibrate droplets of water with ink inside them, for instance, and go through all the different frequency, they shift through the different geometries as you raise the frequency, and so you get this potentially on every microcosm and a macrocosm, potentially throughout the whole solar system, the galaxy, and the universe as well. So there's certainly something in that is hard to explore from our sort of tiny human perspective, trying to looking at it on a global scale.
Yeah, but in terms of that cymatics idea, there could be the idea that, in other words, let's take the pyramids for example.
Yeah.
That if they were built on a place that facilitated actually not only the levitation of the stones because the energy existed there, but the shape that they took, the pyramidal shape in those particular areas and around the world. Why pyramids are built in certain places, facilitated perhaps by the landscape. Now there's different points of view, but I've actually seen in a vision the moving of the stones that have been basically moved across the ground using a levitation technique, using the hands and energy resonance between the people and the stone, and water there's some thought that water might be part of that process as well.
Yeah, I mean, the moving of the stones, that's one of the big mysteries of the megalithic realm and the pyramids and all this kind of subject. I mean, one of the things intrigues me is that, like, you go back to the legends of the ancient British, for instance, and you get the legend of Merlin, and he is said to have hovered stones across the landscape just by pushing them along, and they float. Other cultures, like in Tibet and South America, I mean, Viracocha in South America, there's legends of him creating certain sounds with trumpets and horns, and that would levitate the stones as well. And you get these stories from Tibet where similar things have happened just in the last 100 years. And then you get the mystery of Coral Castle in Florida, which is absolutely mind-blowing. This small Latvian guy who's less than 5 feet tall managed to move these hundreds of megalithic blocks. Weighed up a total of 1,000 tons. He moved, and so
he had the secret. There's absolutely no doubt that he had the secret. My understanding is he's died now.
That's right.
He's not with us any longer.
But one of the things with you mentioned the water as well. So I think there's two aspects here. There's the, as you mentioned, the acoustics, where the vibration, you can even do it with the human voice if you're a master of that. But I think the horns had something to play in it, and also, like, by charging the stone, because often it's slightly magnetic. A lot of the different types of stone they used. But I think there's a lot to be said about water, and if you get water to about 4 degrees in temperature, then if you often when you place heavy things on it, they float, but it has to maintain that temperature. Otherwise, if it goes below it, it will either sink, or if it goes above it, it will sink. And there's something that this guy I know in East Anglia called Buster Nolan has been researching. He's been looking at Victor Schauberger's technologies and applying how they would work at ancient sites. And there's certainly something going on there, because if he's right, then water could have played a part, and they could have made these channels of water and moved things around like that. And just built up these sort of boxes. So it's quite a practical way of looking at how they could have moved the stones. But I think a combination of that with the sound technology, or even the sound magic, you might want to call it, is I think that they're the two things that need to be researched properly.
Okay, yeah, I agree. I think I don't know if this is just a coincidence, but the number 4 being the idea of the cube as a platform.
Okay.
So that you only have it when the water is at a temperature that it creates a platonic solid that would be a cube. Would something be able to rest on it?
Okay, yeah, because it could
balance.
It could be
it's just a thought.
Because it seems, that's a good point. Because the cube is like one of the strongest shapes.
Yeah.
If you look at it from a construction perspective.
Right.
And whereas the other platonic solids are generally they're weaker if it's from structural.
But they also tend to have and
the cube is just like that,
Right.
And like interestingly, the King's Chamber in the Great Pyramid is like 2 cubes. The geometry of it is precisely.
Yeah.
And you find
there's some magical thing about the cube. And I know that this friend of Michael's, Willem de Swat, is coming out with this book, The Secret Numbers of God, but it's all talking about the nature of different numbers and what they mean in our environment, and how they construct. This world is constructed out of those geometric shapes. That relate to the numbers. So. In terms of Megalithomania, because you've got a conference coming up, right? Yeah.
We've got in Glastonbury on the 14th and 15th of May in 2011. We've got our annual Megalithomania conference. I mean, the one we're doing here in South Africa is like a kind of spin-off from that with Michael Tellinger, obviously. And so the one we're doing it every year in Glastonbury. We've got John Major Jenkins. He's a sort of Mayan scholar, Olmec scholar. Robert Temple, who was kind of at this conference via the internet. I don't know if you know Chris Knight and Alan Butler, who've written Civilization 1 and Before the Pyramids. Superb researchers. And Carmen Boulter is going to be there as well, and quite a few other interesting people. I'm going to be personally looking at the local landscape where I'm currently living in East Anglia. And it's going to be like, everyone's coming from all over the world again. It's going to be a really nice little gathering. And we're doing lots of tours. I really recommend people come on the tours, because that's what it's all about, really, getting to these sites. We get private access to Stonehenge, and we do dowsing, we tune in,
Awesome. Well, now that I know you get private access to Stonehenge, it's going to be very hard to stay away with all the other possible interviews I might be able to get at the time. Okay, well, this has been really fascinating, Hugh. Is there any other sort of places that you think you need to go in the near future, like that are really gonna, you're just dying to get out to sort of move your research along at this time?
Yeah, there's a couple of places. Number one is Bosnia. I want to go and check out the pyramids there. And luckily, Semir Samosmanagic, the kind of guy who kind of rediscovered them, he's coming to Megalithomania. He's going to be speaking there, which is great. And also, I've been discussing with him about us taking a group over there in early September. And so we're looking if anyone would like to join us from a megalithic perspective. He's putting on a conference, not a Megalithomania, just a sort of local, bringing researchers in from all around the planet to discuss the pyramids there. And also we're going to be looking at all the other sites there that aren't so well known. There's quite a lot of stuff there. And I really recommend, people, it would be good fun. We'll go together, check out this conference, go on a little tour.
Sounds great.
It's all on the website, all the details. And so I really want to go there, because if he's correct in his findings, then it's pretty much the biggest pyramid in the world next to Cholula, which is in Mexico, which is definitely the largest one.
Okay.
But it's the second. It's bigger. It's like a third bigger than the Great Pyramid, for instance. And so I'm very intrigued that no one's noticed a series of pyramids, ancient megalithic sites, and tunnels, and all these other things sitting in there in Bosnia, in Visoko, the town. So, and there's been some interesting preliminary tests done there about the earth energies and the different magnetic anomalies in the area. So I'd be interested to get a team over there who can kind of focus on that.
Okay. What about, have you, I don't know how accessible it is, but what about China? Have you looked into any sacred sites in that area?
I'm fascinated, but that is actually one of the other places I really would like to go, is the Far East, because you get these pyramids in China, which have fascinated me. The way they're all placed, it just looks so similar to like either Mexico or Egypt. There's also, if you go, in Japan, obviously with all this stuff happening, there's a huge amount of stuff there which people don't really know about, and Korea. I had a friend give me a call about a year ago who'd just been to Korea, and he said, Hugh, there's 19,000 dolmens in Korea. And so the fact that there just happens to be 19,000 dolmens in one country, so just gives a whole other sort of, powerful kind of backing that there was a global megalithic kind of empire all around the planet in prehistoric times, and the same technology was being spread around the world. And we know that the dolmen, from an earth energies perspective, was the ideal megalithic structure to harness this earth energy and focus it into a certain area where you can place your seeds, or you can sit and meditate and have these altered states of consciousness.
More so than the pyramid?
I don't know about more so, but certainly as well as.
Okay.
And the thing about dolmens is that they're relatively easy to construct compared to a pyramid. It's literally, you can do it with 4 stones, 2 or 3 stones uprights with the lid on top like a table, which is what dolmen means. And they're very easy to, they're still, quite tough, and they're still huge and megalithic, and but they're everywhere on the planet, dolmens. That's the strange thing about them. Unlike stone circles, which seem to congregate in Europe, especially England or Britain, and the pyramids in certain areas, dolmens are almost in every country. And we think we found dolmen at one of the sites here in South Africa the other day. So I want to, if we go there again tomorrow on the tour, I want to double check that, because it looks clearly like a dolmen within the centre of a later structure.
Okay, yeah.
And so,
I wouldn't be surprised. I actually recall seeing something when we were out there in the fields, looking at one of the stone structures, that there might be something against a sort of an altar wall part of one of the stone circles. Okay, have you ever heard about this the pyramid, this reverse pyramid that is underground, said to be underground in Spain? Going like this. It's like the point is at the bottom, underground.
No, I've never heard of that.
You never heard of it?
No, I'm intrigued by that.
Yeah, somebody wrote to us or something, and apparently there is a pyramid, a reverse pyramid in Spain.
Well, do you know whereabouts? Well, where is that?
I don't know. I'd have to go back into the the information that was sent to us, but
sure.
I'm sure that people in Spain, anyone listening to this, might be able to to reply.
Yeah.
But apparently that's what they say.
Well, I'd be very
And it's supposed
interested.
to be huge.
Okay, I'll be fascinated. I'm going to Spain at the end of August, so I'll be interested in checking it out. If anyone's got any info, let us know.
Okay, cool. Now, I just one last thing, because we are, talking, and we're doing this at a time when there's major Earth changes happening on the planet, and there's what we do at Camelot is try to awaken consciousness in order to not only raise the vibration of the planet and of humanity, but in order to mitigate some of the Earth changes that have been prophesied, so to speak. In talking to you about these energetic places, it seems like a logical jump that if we were to gather people, for example, at some of these power places, to access these energies and to then be able to meditate and connect each other in a very peaceful, loving manner, it's possible we could change the whole sort of trajectory of maybe Earth changes that are currently happening, and possibly even alter things like what's going on with the nuclear reactor. Because certainly the accessing of these energies at these power places is so profound, and the ancients, so to speak, knew what could be done, and it just seems to me that we're kind of missing the boat in what's the next jump as to what can be done with these. We now know they exist, and you're one of the researchers, but there are a lot out there people have tapped into this, and more and more people are getting into that whole notion. I mean, I agree. I mean, there's something that in my early days of grid research, something these psychic children were doing was actually one of the reasons they chose Hawaii for this conference back in 2003, was because of that, and they wanted to have put a strong intention out through the planet for peace and harmony. And interestingly, right when that was happening, on the exact opposite side of the planet was when the part of the Gulf War in Iraq was kicking off. One of the many different levels of that was actually just kicking off, and so one of the reasons the intention was there was to sort of bring balance to the other side of the planet and put it through. And so this kind of thing, and there are these global meditations, and there's called Fire the Grid. It's quite a well-known one, and I think let's just do that as much as possible. Certainly makes sense, and even in just going out to sites yourself. Just set an intention, sending good energy out through the grid, through the earth energies. There's certainly no harm in it. And as long as you're pure and then your intentions and your feelings, I can't see any harm, and it can only bring good for sure. And I think it does amplify. There's proof of that now. Absolutely.
There's a lot of proof of that, and I think that could be one of the purposes of why these sites are built to last, so we can maintain that enchantment on the planet. And one interesting a bit of research that was done was the idea that Chris Dunn put together, that the Great Pyramid and the pyramids in Giza were actually used somehow energetically to absorb the energy from like earthquakes, movements of Earth from different parts of the planet even, and somehow they absorbed that energy and used that energy to actually power the thing itself and create this kind of energy system. And it's a lot more complicated than that, but that's the fundamentals of it. He believed that the resonance, because it was built as a harmonic of the exact northern hemisphere of the Earth, he felt that could act as an oscillator and actually bring this energy in that to reduce earthquakes. And some people have suggested that even that pyramids in different parts of the world were placed accordingly, and megalithic sites, because it helped reduce the earthquakes. And I find it particularly fascinating in England that many of the megalithic sites are built upon fault lines throughout the different parts of the country, or certainly on lines where there's different energetic fluctuations. And so I think there's something to do with it.
That's a very good point. I think it was Antoine Gigal, who was speaking at the conference. She showed. Do you remember when she was investigating? I don't know if it was in Mauritius or that island, or it was Sicily. I forget which one. But there's a volcano that is erupting, and then the lava was going. Right before it got to the pyramid, it stops, and it stops in a wave, and just halts.
That's interesting.
And so it seems to me, and she was hinting that she didn't actually come out and say it, but it was obvious that was her point, that here was this pyramid that had been built. I think it was Sicily, come to think of it, and here was this wave of lava, and it's halted. It's like almost frozen.
That's really strange.
Right there. It doesn't go any further. It's as if it's because, and it doesn't even, you know, like lap up against the pyramid. It stops right before it. In other words, the force field of the pyramid seemed to exert a magnetic circle there that caused it to halt.
Well, that's absolutely fascinating. I
Yeah,
must
it
have
is.
missed that bit, but yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense.
Well, it connects with what you're saying.
Yeah, and I think they had a lot of control over the elements. The ancient peoples, the masters, and the
Yes.
priestly caste, whoever they were, they certainly had some kind of control over the elements. And I think if they could levitate stones and cut stone in that kind of way, there's no reason they couldn't control sort of molten stone as such, you know, like lava.
Yeah.
And so you never know, you know, not quite kind of magic was going on there.
And there's also the thought that perhaps, I'm just throwing this out because tsunamis is always been an issue. And so you've got waves of water, and I wonder if there might be something going on with that as well. I don't know if there's any constructions, you know, along coasts and so on and so forth that would have anything to do with that. But it's, you know, it's an area of investigation.
Yeah, it deserves to be looked into, I think.
And at this
yeah,
time,
yeah.
when we have so many, you know, things going on around the planet, you know, better late than never.
Yeah, for sure.
And so, but it's the lost information from, you know, hidden truths that the ancients had access to that we don't seem to have fully grasped at this point. And obviously people like you, investigators that are looking into these things, are so valuable to bring that stuff to the fore.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the main reason we do this Megalithomania conference and project, is to bring all the people together who are doing the cutting edge research.
Yes.
Get them all up on stage, have it an open forum, put it out on the internet, live stream it, you know,
Absolutely.
get it out there as far and wide as possible, and travel the world doing it now, which is great. But I really think it's important to have that open forum, not just on, you know, megalithic sites, but on, you know, different subjects. It needs it.
Yes.
And I think, you know, the one thing about which people seem to miss the point with megaliths, we're not just obsessed by rocks, you know, we're not just like, you know, it's not just that. It's like a calling to who we were, and so we can find out who we are, because we've lost that connection. There's no history. We've lost our history. It only goes back a few generations. You can trace your history and your family line. So I think it's a real calling people have to these ancient sites. It's more than just of interest or wondering what they were doing scientifically. It's like we're connecting with our own family, our own relatives who built these sites.
Yes.
And they put compassion and intention into these sites, which we're now starting to recognise again. So I think there's a lot of different levels to approach these sites. It's not just an interest in big rocks.
Okay, good point. Hugh Newman, thank you so much. I appreciate this, and let's keep in touch. And hopefully, I'll go to Megalithomania and get more interviews, and we'll continue this dialogue.
Thank you very much. But actually, right, check this out here. This is interesting. I don't know if you want to put this on here or not, but when my mum was pregnant with me, my dad and my mum went on a road trip around Wiltshire, and they went to Stonehenge, Avebury, all the megalithic sites. They weren't into it at all. They just had a camper van and fancied a night out, a couple of days out. And then one morning, I was kicking in my mum's womb and that, and she sort of said, "Well, we've got to pull over here." We pull over here. We pulled into this car park. We all sort of made the bed, went to sleep and everything. Next morning, they wake up and there's this massive great hill behind them. And of course, that's Silbury Hill, and they parked on the Michael and Mary lines in Silbury Hill car park.
Cool.
You know, and I was yet to be born, so I thought that's quite interesting.
Yeah, so this is your destiny.
Yeah, I think it is, yeah.
This.
I think I made them do it, but, you know.
Okay, well, that's fair too.
Because one of the legends about the whole area is the legend of Quetzalcoatl.
Yes.
And he was like a tall, white-looking guy, pale features, beard, long robes, blue eyes, very almost like albino, you know, and he was like glowing with energy. He came with a band of followers on what was called a raft of serpents, and he turned up on the Gulf Coast area, which is where all the Olmecs were, and actually created and taught lots of people and travelled through that whole area teaching these people all these different arts.
Hi, I'm Carrie from Project Camelot, and I am here with Hugh Newman, and we've just completed the Megalithomania conference here in South Africa, and I am very happy to be able to take some time out and talk to Hugh Newman. We did a short interview at the pyramids in Egypt, which was a lot of fun, and I think it had a lot of viewers out there, but we didn't get a chance to really get in deep into the subjects that Hugh covers. And so this is our opportunity, and so Hugh, welcome.
Thank you.
And what I'd like to do is have you talk about your background in sort of just a quick summary, and then I assume that people can go catch up on our first interview. Anything that we covered there, let's try not to go over some old ground. But we do want to talk about the grid lines, and I'd love to talk about your trip down to Central America and the Olmecs and all of that. So take it away.
Okay, well, what got me into this sort of earth mysteries or megalithic subject is really the crop circles. A lot of people and there was one particular Olmec sculpture, altar type thing, that had these snake symbolism all around it, and also it had this sort of priestly sort of, I don't know what it was, emerging from this big square stone, about the size of this table. It was huge.
Yeah.
And me and my friend Ivan walked up to it, and when we were about 10 feet away, suddenly we felt this powerful energy field all around it, and it was palpable. You could touch it.
Yeah.
You could actually feel like where it was with your hand. We weren't dowsing, it was by pure chance. It's almost like something in us is like demanding we're going in there, we're going to do this, whatever the authorities say. And they've realised that there's nothing can stop the people now, they have to let us in. And so I like that side of it, that these have such a power, these sites, that they magnetise you so strongly that even like the authorities cannot do anything about it. And I think this is happening all over the world. You get the popularity of these sites is awesome. One of the things area in East Anglia where I'm currently staying, there's a place called Eversden, and from 1936 I think it was, there was a crop circle report. This woman, a farmer's wife, went out into their backyard and all these fields, and she reported these strange energy and light phenomena in her garden. She went out to investigate. There was this crackling sound when she went, just freshly, and there was a freshly made crop circle there. And so that's back in the 1930s. So how do you have to kind of throw that kind of thing in there when people start claiming that all crop circles are man-made. You can go much further back in time with the crop circles. For instance, there's the famous mowing devil. It goes back to the 1600s, and again in East Anglia, in the east side of England. And where these light phenomena was happening, and then there was something that appeared in the field there, and they claimed it was the devil, but actually it was probably just a crop formation classically being created, which has been reported kind of all over the world now.
Okay, so have you made it a sort of a study of yours to get into what the crop circles might mean?
Yeah, I mean, as soon as you get involved in studying crop circles and you sort of go into it and you look at the geometry, the maths and the sophistication of it, and also interestingly when they appear, like the dates of them and other things like this, you start finding all these parallels and almost like confirmations of things that you've been looking into. And so I find it such an incredible subject, which is so easily overlooked by people who laugh at them. But I really think there's too many dimensions and there's too many formations now to actually ignore them. And the thing that inspires me really is the relationship of these crop circles to the ancient sites, and because they're always in the vicinity of them. And most stone circles you get in the sort of Wiltshire area, especially the largest stone circles in the world, like Avebury, etc. Are actually right with a hub where all the crop circles appear around. And you get this at other sacred sites all across Britain and the world, so there's some connection there. So immediately I started looking into the earth energies and noticed that all these energy lines, the energy currents, sort of form between these ancient sites and sort of travel over the landscape. Crop circles seem to be placed between them, as though something's being put through these earth energies, some kind of intelligence or phenomena, and it's actually possibly creating the crop circles. It's just speculation research at the moment. It's not. There's been no scientific studies done on this. But the more you look into it, the more you dowse and you find these particular formations between these sites, you realise there's something going on there.
So, are you a dowser?
Yeah, I do dowsing. Yeah, I've been studying geomancy with Sean Kerwin, who's a sort of master geomancer back in England.
Okay, and when you say geomancer, is that the official word for dowsing?
Yes, the Western tradition, I think, geomancy, whereas in the East it's feng shui. But what me and Sean sort of specialise in, well, he does the whole thing. He's been trained up for like 10 years, but he's taught me all his techniques of dowsing, especially for earth energies and ancient sites, and how to do that properly there. Again, people question dowsing and the geomancy, but when you look how far that goes back. It's quite incredible. It goes back, if not hundreds, certainly thousands of years. And it's even used by modern industry to find underground water pipes and electric wires. Find the same thing because it's just such an amazing phenomenon. Whoever makes them, people say they're man-made, people say they're aliens, but most of them have no explanation and they haven't been discovered. So I was drawn into that about 15 years ago, and from that, suddenly within a few years I realised I was visiting all these ancient sites just incidentally because they're always based near them, and that really drew me into this whole ancient mysteries realm about who built these sites and how do they move these megaliths, and all the earth energies particularly and ley lines kind of really caught my attention, and I suddenly developed this sort of passion for it and basically became a megalithomaniac and just got completely involved in that world and started researching it and covering it. Eventually putting on the Megalithomania conference. So it's just a case of really the crop circles. They have so many dimensions to them as well. You think about the geometry, the placement in the landscape, the sophisticated mathematics, and many other aspects. And so that's kind of what drew me in. But there's a lot of other things that sort of brought me to this point in my life where I was kind of attracted to these kind of, especially landscape type of mysteries.
Okay. So you're one of those people that I assume thinks that most crop circles are not man-made.
Yeah, you could say that. I mean, I've seen some incredible footage of balls of light and orbs and different reports that have come through over the years about many of the crop circles. Now, probably lots of them are man-made now because it's like the phenomenon has gone into the public domain. Mm-hmm. And since the Doug and Dave incident, that's kind of what it's been developed since then. But you look in the history books with crop circles, for instance, and just in my local area,